Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for the next installment of the Agave Renaissance series. So my name is Ben Wilder. I am the director of the Desert Laboratory here on Tumamoc Hill, known in Atam as Chimamagi Duag, Horned Lizard Mountain, on the ancestral lands of the Savaipri and Donatam peoples. This volcanic hill is of prominent ancestral, cultural, and sacred significance to the Atam nations, including the Donatam Nation, Gila River Indian Community, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, the Akchin Indian Community, the Hopi tribe, and the Pascua Yaqui tribe. The Desert Laboratory recognizes the cultural significance of Chimamagi Duag as the bedrock of our institution and our future actions. This lecture series thus far, and for those of you that have been able to tune into the other installments, has been really wonderful. And been talking about it with folks recently, and one of the real inspirations as part of this was to learn. There is such a robust body of knowledge represented in the connection and this reciprocal relationship that we've been talking about between people and agave. And it goes over an incredible geographical area, including much of what we are defined as arid America, stretching down into southern Mexico and beyond the borderlands into northern Arizona and parts of Utah. And it also stretches deep amounts of time, going back from millennia. And one of the things that I think we're starting to really get into the layers more is there's infinite varieties within this relationship too, in variations and nuances. That is one of the things that's been really was at the core of partnering with El Crisol and Doug and Amy Smith, and then also with Hotel Congress with Todd Hanley and others. So the this presentation and set of presentations tonight by Jacob Butler and Cheryl Pizzot connect us and really for me is hits right on the learning element and talks about indigenous knowledge and practice of agave. And I think it takes really picks up very well from our presentation last month by Susie Fish with the knowledge that is still held today, and also elements that maybe aren't as prominent today, but that were previously, and a remarkable amount of opportunity going forward. So the way that we're going to go for tonight is just to kind of lay the landscape here for you. Jacob is going to be presenting first, and then Cheryl will present. And then we will bring both of them back on, and I will moderate a question and answer period with questions that occur to me, but more importantly, questions that occur to you. So please enter your questions or comments, but preferably more questions into the Q&A box there, and then we'll be folding those in when we get to that section. Just a note about time. These conversations have generally been so rich and multi-layered that we go beyond the 7 o'clock mark. We don't, but we will definitely wrap up by 7:30 this evening. So get comfortable and welcome everybody. So I'd first like to welcome Jacob Butler. Jacob, feel free to turn on your video and mute and unmute while I introduce you. So Jacob Butler is a member of the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. He is Ankh Akimel Atam and has lived within the community his entire life. Mr. Butler specializes in traditional shell work ranging from shell etching and carving to overlay and inlay. He is equally known as a skilled potter practicing the paddle anvil technique, a pottery style used by his ancestors. His work can be found or has been on display in collections of local museums, national monuments, the Smithsonian, and the Kiva Gallery in Sweden. Jacob is also the community gardeners coordinator for the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community and has worked with many indigenous communities across the country during the past 17 years. Jacob is also the current chair of the nonprofit organization Native Seed Search and soon to be board member of the Pueblo Grande Museum Auxiliary Board, Friends of Pueblo Grande. I'll say that I just recently, Jake, we just recently had the chance to meet for the first time Wednesday, and Doug helped us connect, and it's such a pleasure to meet you and to have you presenting here. And you gave us a little snippet of the presentation last week, and I just wanted you to give the whole thing. It was so wonderful. So I'm excited for all you're going to say. So welcome and thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, it's always a pleasure to help out when asked, and you know, being able to do something with you guys, Tumamoc, you know, or Tumamoc dog, it's just awesome. So yes, good morning, joke everyone. Supper masma, honey on the Jacob Butler, honey on Akimel. Today I just wanted to share a little bit about what I know about out and how we use it as the autumn. And I'm not going to go too much into like the archaeology or the technical sides of an agave presentation, because I think Miss Fish did it, or Professor Fish did a very good job. So I think tonight's going to be a little more less technical, a little more informal, and that's just kind of how I give my presentation. So bear with me on that, and thank you for having me. And so yeah, like the title says, the out is how you say agave, and agave's had a relationship with the people for a long time, for time immemorial, and it's interesting to know that even when we irrigated like over 100,000 acres of farmland with 1,000 miles of canal systems, we still were taking care of these semi-domesticated or wild crops like agave. And right across the way from A Mountain, which we call Oitbat, is Loma del Rio. It's an archaeological site that was terraced, not in the way that the Chincheras did it, but it was still terraced, and they grew agave there. So they were still growing the agave and dependent on these resources, even though we had such a vast farming system in the valley. And so it's interesting to know that about 60% or greater of our diet was from wild annuals. And so one of the ways that they farmed, and it was covered in previous presentations, was by trapping moisture in the ground. And so this is an Chin style of farming, and this is located in the floodplain of a bunch of different hillsides. And so what they would do is they would divert water from all of these hills adjacent to this low area with these rock alignments called geoglyphs. And so the rocks would channel that water and push it all to the flat area. And if you look in the picture here, you can see some rock alignments there are little piles of rocks in these long segments. And that was designed to trap the water there, but also trap sediment. And so organic matter would be stuck there and actually build the soil. And there's some places over here on the north end of Scottsdale, I think the Cave Creek area, that they've actually raised the soil like multiple feet from these systems. And so this is just an example of that. And on the outskirts of these fields, they would grow agave. And so this is a cool one. This is a little rock pile, and this is adjacent to another site that I'm going to show in this presentation. So this site wasn't previously recorded, and we stumbled upon it when we were looking at some encroachment and vandalism on our northern boundary that borders the Fort McDowell Yavapai Reservation and Tonto National Forest. And so down below the agave field that I'm going to talk about, we found these rock outcroppings. And if you look at the rock outcroppings, it promotes life. And so there's a lot of vegetation growing in these rock outcroppings. And so our staff archaeologists had thought that this may be an agave site or an extension of the agave site that's up on top of this hill. And so that style of farming was really vital to growing agave and things like that when you had no water, like a river, or no permanent water sources. So it was totally dependent on rainfall. And today we take that kind of knowledge and we apply it in a different way. So I'm also trained through the permaculture, our permaculture train, our indigenous living through the Native American Farmers Association, the Traditional Native American Farmer Association, out of New Mexico. And what really struck me and kind of made me want to learn more about it was the spiral mound. And so the idea of permaculture is a permanent way of agriculture, permanent living with the environment. And so you lower your carbon footprint, you're more in tune with the environment. And the spiral mound, to me, was kind of a play on the rock piles that sustain agave and other plants. And so we started to use those and apply them a little differently. So in a spiral mound, as it's known through permaculture, they have a water oil on top of that, and it acts like a cistern, and it leaches water into the system. But what we do is we create a reservoir on the bottom and fill that up with rocks, and then we create a bed in the form of a spiral. And it has domesticated plant applications, but for what our purposes were was to try to look at ancient techniques and find applicable ways to utilize them today. And so this has a really good landscaping application for people that, especially living in the area that we live in, where water is a vital resource, it's treasured and it's cherished. And so, and the prices of maintaining a yard is very high. And so by planting xeric plants or low water requirement plants in this system, we only have to sustain it once or two times a year with irrigation. And really, we wouldn't have to do that if we didn't want them to really thrive and flourish. And so pretty much these systems, when in place, can sustain all of the plant life that's found here in the desert. And this is, for me, a play on these ancient techniques that our ancestors used. And so I'm the garden coordinator for Salt River, but that name doesn't really reflect all of the work that we do. So any really plant related subjects or projects in the community, we have a hand in. And one of them is actually taking kids on hikes and showing them the value of these lands, not only just as a resource, but a connection to our Himadak, or our way of life, you know, and the cultural relevance that these plants and this land has to the people. And so the Salt River's preserve area is known as, the land there archaeologically is known as the Red Mountain phase in the Hohokam timeline. It's one of the oldest timelines or time periods of the Hohokam timeline. And the Hohokam, like other people have shared with you all, is the name that archaeologists gave to a certain time period of our ancestry. So there are Hohokam, but the people before them and the people after them that have passed are Hohokam as well. And so that's where that name came from. But in the context of that certain time frame, this is one of the oldest areas in the Hohokam timeline. And it's a really cool one. So this is a site that was actually studied as a field school from ASU. And I had taken some kids out there and showed them some things. And I went back to our staff archaeologist and I told him, you know, I think there's an archaeological site out there. And so he did his research and he said, yeah, there's it was theorized as an agave site, but no agave has really been found there. But they find all the telltale resources or artifacts that would accompany growing agave. And so if you look here, you can see some rock alignments that we're standing in front of. I'm pointing out another one. And a lot of them are laid out on contour of the land. So what it does is it slows the water as it falls and it traps it along those lines. And the people were farming agave. And while we were up there, a new employee came and he wasn't aware of agave. And so he had asked what they look like. And so I explained it to him and he said, you know, I go hunting here. I go hunting with my father and I think I've seen those. And so we went out looking and sure enough, we found some agave. And so this next picture will show it. And so what's really cool about this is Agave Murphyii. And this is just a small representation of the stand that we found. And where we found it was underneath the Palo Verde tree. And if you look to the left of the screen, right in the lower corner, you can see some remains of another agave. And as we look back, we looked along this rock alignment and you can trace back about 20 years at a time all of this decayed plant matter, and it stretched all the way back till the soil turned dark. And so as the plant matter decays, it returns back into the soil. And so it was really cool to see, because that agave had walked across the land following the resources, and over time it formed a relationship with these Palo Verde. And so the Palo Verde that's up there, they were nestled underneath them, and they were kind of protected in this little microclimate that created a sustainable habitat for these plants. And so we're really excited. We went back to our community. We asked our community for permission to take some of the pupils and bring them home. And so when we did that, we also provided water. We gave our blessings, and we gave our offerings, to the plants, and we helped to make their habitat a little better. And so now that stand up there is a lot better than it was when we found it. And it was really cool because for me, there's a lot of talk about the bats and the pollination of the flowers and creating seed in the agave. But the practice that I've been shared, and how I've been taught that the people had a relationship with these plants just like the bats did. And there's some evidence to say that plants have a lot of control over the people that utilize them, and that they form these relationships that are mutually beneficial with them. So I feel that the relationship with the people, in helping to propagate and spread agave is an intentional one by the art, or the agave. And so we did that. We took I believe 5 of them home, and we planted them in different areas. And the areas that they grew the best under were Palo Verdes. And so it's cool that they formed that relationship with those plants over the time that they've been there. And for us to hold them, like we were freaking out. And so when we actually found the stand and we took the babies, like, not only to be in their presence, but to actually touch these little mama, the babies, it was just special, because we were literally touching something that our ancestors had planted in the ground over 600 years ago, because the pups are identical clones of those plants. And so it was a true living connection to our ancestors, to those Hulgum that came before us. And so it was just something that's really hard for me to really express verbally, but it was a very special moment. And today we have, I believe, 50 of these plants in the garden. And a friend of mine had worked with the Desert Botanical Gardens. I think he was volunteering there. His name is Chris Luna. And so he took an agave to the Desert Botanical Gardens, and they said that they hadn't been that site hadn't been identified. It wasn't recorded as an agave site. And specifically, this is Agave murphyi. So this is the plant that our ancestors domesticated, and this wasn't on the registry. And so now it is, and it's known by our staff, our archaeologists, as a protected site. And so it's a very special place. If you look right below the agave, there's a little gray rock, and it may be hard to see, but that's actually a lithic or a stone tool. And there's another one to the left. And there's a close-up picture that's coming next that'll show the worked edge. And so these tools are scattered all over the ground. This one, like Professor Fish had shared last time, would have been hafted to something for scraping. But there's all types of tools all over the ground that indicate that this was an agave site. There's pits for roasting. There's even a field house there. And this is just above another site that was a village during that Red Mountain time. And so this is very special. And a lot of our kids go out there to enjoy the area, the riparian area, but they weren't made aware of the history and the time and the relevance to the land and the connection to the land that we have. And so being able to take our kids up there is a blessing for me, and it's something that I really take seriously. And so all these kids got to see the site. They know that it should be respected when they're out there. And so a lot of different agaves were used by the people. And so this is Agave Americana, or the giant blue agave. And some agave weren't actually used or preferred as foods. Some were primarily used for fibers and others were used for foods. And this one here, the saponins or the caustic juices that are in the plant are very, very strong. And so the giant blue agave, if you want to try it out, I wouldn't suggest it, but we've done it to ourselves and we've done it to some of the unruly kids that we worked with, and with permission of their parents. I'm related to a lot of the kids that we work with, and so one time a kid was cutting up one of our agaves in the garden, and so we asked him, kind of lectured him, but we told him he needs to respect those plants, that they're special to our people, and that plant can hurt him as well as he can hurt it. So he didn't believe me. So I said, well, cut a piece off of the part that you already cut off and write your name in the juice on your arm. And so he did, and then it immediately started itching. And it causes like dermatitis or like a blistering to your skin. So his name was blistered into his skin for like 2 weeks. And so I think he kind of learned his lesson. That was early on in my career. And so I don't do that now, but it was definitely a cool learning experience. But the blue agave, because of those juices, is primarily used by the people for their fibers. The fibers are a little coarser, they're a lot stronger, and things like baskets and other utilitarian objects are created from this plant. And then the next one, this one is Agave deserti, or the desert's agave. And I just really love this picture. So in the past, we've actually been able to go and assist other tribes with their agave roasting. And so this one was a number of years ago, way out in California. And so we went and helped out with the Morongo tribe, and we harvested agave with them and roasted their agave in a pit. That was a little different than ours, but same principal purposes and applications. And so this is also an agave that we would have utilized in the past. And this one is a little less in the caustic juices, so it's a little more palatable. One of the things that we're able to do with in coordination with Tonto and the other national forests is actually harvest things for cultural use. And we went out and actually harvested agave chrysantha a few years ago. And one of the things that I was shared is that was shared with me is that one of the ways you can tell when it's about to set its flower stalk or about to shoot is if you look at the apical meristem, if you look at that center collection of leaves, if it's open to the size of the tip of your thumb or to the size of a dime, then that's getting ready to shoot that flower stalk. And if that happens, all of the energy that's been stored in those starches in the center of that plant is going to be utilized to send that stalk up. So that energy is then used, and then the starches that we would then turn into healthy sugars and these carbohydrates that the people would need to work these long hours and exist out here in this hostile environment would then be utilized for that stock. And so that's the prime time to take it, so that all of those energies are trapped in that plant and the people can utilize it. I forgot to share with my staff that the juices are a little caustic. And so I told them to be careful when they were bringing it down the hill, but they had been like switching on and off, holding it on their necks, holding it on their arms, putting it on their backs. And so as they were sweating, all that juice was just getting all over them. And it was an interesting ride home. But this one was a really big heart. We roasted it. Our process takes 3 days to roast in the ground. And these ones are very sweet and they have a very pleasant taste. And my kids loved them. And so to help with the transportation, we remove a lot of the leaves off of the base. We don't take the base of the leaf off though, because that is a prime part of that leaf for food. And it also helps to protect the heart when it's being roasted in the pit. And so we remove the leaves, and you can actually make cordage on site just by a simple cordage by rolling it on your leg and tying them together. And so it makes transportation of these other resources that you're harvesting while you're harvesting food easily move from the site. And so this is just a way to tie those leaves together in bundles so that they can be removed easier. And so this is just a close-up of a simple cordage. You want to remove all the flesh. Once you get the fibers, you roll it on your leg. And then right here is actually an agave heart being removed from the garden that we worked in. And if you look closely, the bag that it's in is just steaming. So this is after three full days, 3 full nights, and there's still heat coming out of the ground. If you look at some of the base of that hole there, there's a lot of plant material. And so traditionally the people would use Ong Ewok or 4-winged saltbush. So once the rocks were heated up, the coals were in place, and they're all burnt down and ready for the pitting, we would then soak 4-winged saltbush in water, lay it along the coals, and then place the agave hearts on top. And then another layer of the 4-winged saltbush would be placed on top of that, and then dirt would be covered. So all the dirt behind me, it's harder to see, but there's a big hill of dirt behind me that capped the pit. And so once we do that, we want to make sure that no smoke is coming out, no heat is being released from the pit, and then it sits there for 3 days, and we come out and check on it to make sure that it's still hot. And that's to me the least amount of time that you can have it in the ground to make sure that it's safe to eat. And so 3 to 4 days would be that key time that you would need. And the reason there's a bag on there, so there's all these studies, and one of them that I thought was really interesting was that our ancestors had these little like ground down teeth because there was a lot of soil in their foods. And so pit roasting would do that. If you ever pit roasted cholla buds and ate them, that they're sometimes gritty. But we also created textiles. We grew cotton, and there's blankets and head wraps and shawls and all these things that exist in the collections of our ancestors. And so it's not unthinkable that they would wrap some of their foods in this plant material, but this is definitely, to me, a modern thing that we did, and it helps to keep some of that grit off of your food. And so after the agave is taken out, we also take out any of the leaves that we put in there as an extra layer to keep the agave heart from burning. And this is an awesome way to also extract some of those caustic juices, or to neutralize some of the juices by baking those leaves in the pit while you're cooking your food. And so I'm just peeling back the skin, cleaning it off, and exposing all those fibers. And so those fibers are actually ready to use. And so all you have to do is pound those out, wash them in water, and extract all of those fibers. If you were to do that with a raw leaf, it's very itchy, and that's how it was done. But this is another process, and some people say that when you cook them, it makes them a little weaker, but they're easier to work with. And so it's just what you want to give up and what you're looking to make with it. And so these are examples. So this is the fibers that were extracted from another agave pit that we had done, and some of the leaves, and we got multiple strands like that, and then we would give them out to cultural practitioners that actually utilize them to make things like the burden basket. So a good friend of mine is his name's Royce Manuel, and he actually brought back the traditional burden basket, and so the gyoho, and this is them here. And so this is a traditional example of 2 Otha women carrying these massive water oyas, and they took them to market. And so I believe they were taking them to market here in this picture, but they were used for not only carrying pots and baskets, but for carrying wood and other resources and collecting. And so these were definitely some tough materials that can withstand a lot of wear and tear on them. And And there's some strong women in those pictures. That's a lot of weight. But yeah, and then on the right is a contemporary version of that burden basket, and it's a little harder to see in this picture, but the traditional ones would actually be painted with pigmentation and dyed. So some of the strands that were woven in would have these really cool design elements dyed into them, as well as the pattern that was woven into them. So they were utilitarian, but they were definitely works of art. And so one of the things that we try to do with our program, with the garden, and well, in all aspects of what we do in the garden, is to pass down these traditions and ancient practices. And the practice of roasting agave is no different. And so when you saw me taking the heart out of the ground, my children were there watching me. They were there participating with processing. This is the heart. They're super excited to get a chance to taste it. And it's easier to get kids involved and get them on board with some of these practices than it is to get some of the adults, because they're relatively new and their experiences are fresh, and if we can instill those good experiences in a great way, it's lasting. And so my kids still talk about when's the next time we're going to be able to eat some of this. And so these are the hearts. The agave hearts would then be processed into a lot of different things, like patties that would then be dehydrated and last indefinitely. And it's important to know, like I think I said, the O'odham diet, even though we were farmers, subsisted of at least 60% or more wild annuals. And so these are things that will be gathered at one time and then used throughout the year. And so even outside of the season that we would be in, we would still have agave on the table. And that helped to supplement certain times, especially now. Like at this time today, like we're in the process of tilling our gardens, our fields, turning the soil, planting the seed. But when you plant corn or you plant squash, you're not going to eat it today or tomorrow or even a week from now. You're going to eat it in a few months. And so the wild annuals are what really sustain the people, and the stored food that we had from the season past is what we were depending on. And so this is something that can be stored in large amounts and utilized throughout the year. But the fibers are very harsh on your stomach. And so you would chew this and chew it until all the juices came out, and then you would spit it out almost like a tobacco quid. And I believe they're called agave quids. And they're found all over archaeological sites. And they came from this. This is the Agave Heart. And the taste is awesome. Like it's a smoky, sweet potato kind of taste. It's not super sweet. You can get it even darker and more sugars will come out. But it's a very sweet plant in contrast to all the other plants that you would be eating in the desert. And so what's cool is, these rare treats. And so when we first started this agave practice, our practice of roasting agave, we learned all the different products that came from it, the fibers, needles, and then the different foods. And one of them that was talked about, but not a lot of people remembered, was the sito. And so the sito is a syrup. And so we made it. And we made it the same way that we would make the hashancito or the baidachito, the saguaro syrup. And when we made it, a lot of people were excited, because even some of our elders said, I've heard about this. My parents would talk about it, but I've never tried it. And so from that one heart, after we had a food tastings and the community came out and tasted what agave tasted like, this is what it was reduced to into the syrup. And this is something that we probably wouldn't have done here in the Akimel area, because we're river people. We're primarily a riparian community, but we did grow a lot of different agaves. But the people that were really skilled at doing a lot of this was the O'odham, our relatives to the south, the desert people. And then let me just kind of go into that a little bit. so there's no confusion. So the Tohono and the Akimel are the same people. The word Tohono means desert, and the word Akimel means river. And so it's just a land designation where we come from. So we come from the river, and they come from the desert, and our culture is the same, our language is the same. There's slight dialectual differences in the way we say things, but it would be like somebody from Texas talking to somebody from like Minnesota. They're both speaking English, but it's a little different. And so in the same way with our communities, we're all the same people, and um, we just live in different environments. And so when the Tohono would come up in the late spring and summer to help harvest some of our crops, these are some of the products that they would bring with them. And so they would trade for some of the crops that the Akimel would grow. And this is a big trade item that the Tohono would bring to the people. And so that is a practice that doesn't occur any longer. And so this was a very, very special treat for us. And I've been hoarding this little bottle for about 6 years that I have left. But yeah, this is like what everything ends up in after you're done eating it or processing it. And so one of the things that we do here in the community is we work with a lot of our day laborers. We work with it's a program that helps community members that are currently unemployed have a couple days of work each week. And there's a lot of people that work with our garden that volunteer to work in the garden. We also work with children, elders, and everybody in between. And one of the ways that we utilize the help isn't just by getting free labor. Like, we try to instill these practices and these teachings on the participants so that they can then continue these later. And so through the work that we do, a lot of the participants ask to come back, or they create gardens at their home, and then we walk them through and actually help them create sustainable practices. And then we see a lot of them go out to our range area and our preserve lands and actually start practicing these traditions. And so it's an awesome thing, to have that impact in the community. And this is a pit that's at one of our gathering sites in the reserve or the preserve area. And it's routinely cleared out and reutilized. And so this is a group of young men that hadn't done this before. They excavated the pit, pulled out all of the rocks, relined it, stacked it with wood, and got it going again. And so this one here is the first step in getting ready to pitch your agave. And one of the key things that's needed for us, and I'm not sure if this is something that the Akimel do or it's something that's universal, but by putting the ongevak or the salt bush in there wet, it creates a lot of steam, and that steam is really important to make sure that the hearts are fully baked. And then one of the other cool things about using salt bush is that it imparts, like you might kind of think, is it imparts a little bit of salt and flavoring to the Agave Hearts. And so once that's all pulled out, you can actually eat the leaves of the salt bush as well. And so that was a green for the people. And I can explain more of this process and how we do it, but I'd much rather show you this video that we just did. We did it in coordination with the Pueblo Grand National Monument, Pueblo Grand Museum. And I think it can speak volumes more than I could ever share with you. So thank you. And I hope you enjoy the video. Daiho guy.
Thank you so much, Jacob.
So Ben, may I just add that as the presentation was going on, there was a lot of links being shared. And so I encourage you all to check out those links. And if you'd like to see more videos like that and some of the other things like swirl processing or some of the other stuff that we're doing, I encourage you to check those links out. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that, all of what you did. And when we're out on the ground planting agave, and you asked me to write something in my arm, and I'm gonna think twice.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of people learn their lesson working with me. So I'm not very trusted in that sense.
Good lessons to learn. Great, Jacob. I'll ask you to come back on in a little bit.
Okay.
Cheryl, while you are unmuting yourself and turning your video on, let me formally introduce you. So Cheryl Pizzot is a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe and lives in White River, Arizona. Cheryl is a tribal senior hydrologist at White Mountain Apache and co-founded Myriad. You're gonna have to help me with the pronunciation there, Cheryl. The People's Farm. She enjoys spending her time gardening, traveling, drinking coffee, and spending time with her 2 daughters. Cheryl, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone. First of all, Ben was talking about the farm in the Bikia, and really was the place where I feel like my story started, and looking at foods and wild foods and learning more about my family and where my family lived and what we depend on during these times. I no longer work for the tribe. Right now, I'm a teacher at the junior high school. And so I really feel like later in my life, I really want to be able to do more work in the community and more work with the students and more work with my family. Just listening to the stories from my mother and hearing the things that she was telling me, I was asking her, why didn't you share these stories with me before? And, you know, we all get so caught up in our busy lives and we forget those things that are really important and dear to us. And so I also want to thank Jacob for his presentation, because that was, you know, for me, I've been really trying to look and make connections to different people as I've been starting this journey on learning more about my homeland, but also just my culture. And so hearing the work that they've been doing, this is what the networking is, what networking part that is important to me as well. And so what I wanted to do is just share a short story with you about what I've been doing and what you know, one of the things that we've been looking at is how agave has disappeared in our community, and reaching out to others to find out ways that we can bring that part of the vegetation back to our homeland. Just for those of you that you know, don't know where I'm from, or have just wanted to give you just a general context of where I live. And from what I was told, like, there's a little lag on the internet, but so I'm from the White Mountain Apache tribe, and I'm considered part of the Western Apache in East Central Arizona. So if you look at this map here, and this is one that I took off of the U of A press, and so that's, you know, you'll see this, but I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. But you see our reservation and our traditional homeland, not our reservation. We extend, our lands had started south of Arizona, near the Tucson area, and extended all the way east, and then to the northwest here. And so, covering wide range areas, from the transition zone to the Salt and the Gila River. You can even see San Pedro, that's in here, the rivers that flowed within our traditional area. And because of it, a lot of our people historically went from place to place based on the foods that were available during that time. And so, of course, it's something that you still see with our people now. And I wanted to just give you a picture of a different picture of a reference of where our reservation boundaries are now. And our reservation boundaries here is the White Mountain Apache lands. And it's about 1.6 million acres of land. So about 50 miles from east to west to north to south. And our lands are our reservation is very diverse. When you look at the rivers on the Black River and when it meets the Salt, we'll have about 2,000 feet in elevation. And then you continue climbing up into our higher countries in the White Mountains, and that's up to 11,700 feet. And so, because of how diverse it is, you would see different types of vegetation in our areas. And we also have the headwaters of the North Fork and the East Fork. These are rivers that start on our Apache land. And so that is another thing that is part of our homeland, is the rivers of, excuse me, sorry about that. is the rivers of the White River and the East Fork, the Black River and the Salt. And so, just reminding that, a huge part of our land water based supports our homeland here. But, based on the historical land, as I was showing you earlier, our historical homeland extended past these reservation boundaries. And so one of the things that I've been doing a lot more of is going out and harvesting foods in different areas, and meeting people that have talked to me and asked, and would tell me, well, these are places that we used to go and the places that we would harvest different foods. And so one of the ones that we do a lot of harvesting is acorn. And so acorn, we do a lot of is in the Payson area, right about here in this place. But there's also places down in Fort Huachuca, down in the south. So again, back to our historical lands where we would go for acorn. And I just want to show you a couple of pictures let me see here. Maybe it's here. Okay, here we go. And back to just telling you the story about how harvesting food and sharing food is really important to our family. This is a picture of my mother and my daughter, my youngest daughter. And this is corn, where we barbecue the corn and we harvest that and dry it, and something that we use throughout the year. But I wanted to show you this picture just to give you an idea of the vegetation in our main town, White River. And again, this time we're harvesting tonkoja. And so it's a berry, the skunk bush is what it's called. And so we use the berries for our baskets, and we use the berries to dry and to drink. The term is like Kool-Aid, but it has a very tart taste to it. And this is something that we harvest. But my parents and from my mother and from some of the neighbors that I talked to, they said that there used to be a lot of agave along this area. And so we decided to go out there to look and see if we could find any. And so I was telling my mother that there was nothing left out there. And she was saying, as kids, she said that was our own, one of our main source of food. And so, a lot of it has probably gone because of it, is because we over harvested and pretty much ate it all. And so you see that in a lot of the communities that are in this area, about 5,000 feet in elevation, and the pinon juniper vegetation. And so places like the main town of White River, and about 20 miles west is another town of Cedar Creek. And then you just continue along that zone. And so these were places in our communities that we harvested the agave, but they're no longer there. Even when I was a child, we used to go down to the White River and harvest it and bake it there. And there's no longer any of that there too. And so I've been going around to the communities and just talking to people about what they remember about the harvesting and how did they do it. And a lot of people would talk about picking the agave and roasting it, just the way Jacob was talking about we would dig pits by the river, along the rivers, and bake them and eat them. And then a lot of it we stored. But as I talked to more and more of my community, I was finding out that, the agave that was there is no longer there. And now finding a way that we can either share that resource with people from the south, like the San Carlos Apache, and other tribes to share that knowledge with us, because people like my daughter, members like my daughter who don't remember or who don't know, and who haven't had that before, and just remember based on what I would tell them or what others have shared with me. But I want to show you just another picture. This was my aunt, and my aunt is collecting acorn. And again, another thing that I just wanted to point out too is that a lot of the places that we still harvest off of the reservation are in town. So right down a road, you'll see us picking acorn, and people will come over and ask us, what are you picking? And so, we would go knock on doors from home to home and ask if we could pick under acorn tree. And this is one of the ones that we were picking off of. But just wanting to share with you that, as White Mountain Apache people, a lot of the things that we did and continue to do is harvest food, and harvesting food off of our reservation has been one way that we've been maintaining that part of our culture. This here is a picture of Salt River, and this is my oldest daughter, and they're picking the prickly pear. But just on that side of the river, if you look on opposite side of the river there, is the San Carlos Reservation. And so this is the place that they tell us now that we should go to look for agave. And so if you go south and you continue to drive, and not very far from here, you start seeing the agave. But again, because of what the boundaries of our reservation, what we've been having to do is to extend our travel to some of these places that we used to travel and continue to harvest there. And excuse me here. Let me get that one more picture here on the back to the beginning picture then. So what we've been wanting to do is to meet up with the the people from San Carlos and to see if we could work with them on planning a harvest and picking up the agave on the San Carlos side and meeting with them. And I was talking to a lady from San Carlos just recently, and she was telling me that there was something that they did with White Mountain about 3 years ago. And again, a lot of people came out and they explained to them and they showed them, what the agave looked like and how to bake it. And she was telling me that she was really surprised that, a lot of people were not familiar with it anymore. We're not familiar with how the process worked, how you cooked it, and what ways you could use it. And so for a number of our members, and that it's not all of us, but a majority of us who are going back to looking at our foods, these are important connections that we need to start making, because I really feel like because of that loss of it, it's impacting our knowledge of that plant and what it brought to our families. One other story that I was talking to a younger lady who really wants to learn more about planting and harvesting, and she's actively doing it. But they had a class last summer where they wanted to teach the kids how to do it. And they were talking about, well, where do we get the agave? Because it was part of their agenda for that week. And so they were talking about, well, where do we get that agave? And they couldn't think of anywhere. Well, one of the ladies' sisters was a principal at the high school, and there was a set of them there in front of the high school. And so they went there to harvest it. But that just kind of gives you an idea of, the amount of agave that have disappeared on our land. And so what is that next step for us? What can we do to start bringing that back? And those are questions that we're wanting to look at next, is how do we try to restore that, and how do we try to bring that back into our community? So lastly, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for having me participate. I was talking to my mom about the presentation, and she was telling me, well, when you finish telling your story, you make sure to tell them she was kandisha. She was kandisha. And I was looking at her. I said, what does that mean anyway? She was kandisha. And she was telling me, well, the direct translation is the fruit upside down. But she said, but it does, of course, the direct translation doesn't make sense. But she said, when you tell a story, that's how you close it. That is a phrase that you close with when you tell a story. And so, and it again made me think about the importance of this, the importance of maintaining this and listening to those that can share those types of stories with us, because those are things that I want to be able to share with my kids and tell them, how important that is to maintaining our story. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank your mom for telling you to pass that on to us. Well, Cheryl, stay with us. You can keep your video on, and then feel free to mute yourself and turn your video on too. So we've gotten some questions starting to come through. So please, other people, feel free to start to add in your questions there. I've got one to maybe start with. You both talked about kind of coming, the persistence of agave, and Jacob, in your example of discovering that Agave Americana on the landscape, but Cheryl, in yours, what you shared about a lot of loss of species. And one of the things that's going through my head is that we're talking about different types of agaves, different varieties. And I'm just curious, how much active maintenance is there of the plants when they're planted? You know, is this a thing where people would just put them on the rock piles and leave them, or was there active watering of them through the seasons, augmented water? I'm just thinking for the really dry summer we just went through. Was there a lot of additional water placed on them? Does it depend on the species? Does it depend on the context? I mean, just any insights? I'm curious about that.
So I guess I can comment if you like.
Yes.
And so I would say I'm not too confident, or I'm not too experienced with actually like maintaining agave fields in like the natural environment. You know, so I don't really know exactly, but I would say with the experience of creating spiral mounds and rock mound gardens in the field for the past 20 years, there's certain years where it's very hot, you know, and we have these sustained like heat waves. And so on those days, that's when we would water or supplement those mounds to keep those plants alive and thriving. But for the most part, the system would sustain those plants. I mean, they're like the Murphy eye is something that was domesticated by the people, but I think sometimes some of that care is necessary, and also I think some of the pup hills would have to be thinned out for two reasons. One, to maximize what you're getting out of it. Like, one of the yields is the food, but the other one is the babies. You know, we can plant those other places and create new colonies, and I don't think that's something that's new. And I think that's the way that the people formed a relationship with these plants, is to utilize some of those babies to create these new clusters or these new colonies. And then I think that would also help the mother or the host plant to mature and offer more. And so I think one of the biggest pests for us right now are like gophers that I think the people didn't have to deal with in the past. And so those guys really eat the root systems out. But yeah, I would say in general, no. But during like extreme summers, there probably was a conscious effort to give some supplemental watering to those plants, because we do it today.
Makes sense. Cheryl, did you want to add anything? And I, just so you know, I put you on mute, so you have to unmute yourself. Just there was some reverb happening.
Oh, okay. And no, I was going to mention anything on that end other than when I was asking some of the eldermen that I had asked about, you know, these stories, and I asked, if we got some plants, are those things that we could transfer back and replant? And so, yeah, their question too was, you know, for them was, well, who is going to be able to show us how to do that, and making sure that when we do plant it, how long does it take before, you know, stabilizes and so those were questions that I had about that.
Question from Deb Balmer says, when are the hearts harvested? Jacob, you mentioned that a little bit in your presentation, but any additional detail either of you could provide on that, I think would be interesting. And maybe like in time of year too, sorry.
Oh yeah. And so like for us, we would do it in the late spring. Late spring is when they're starting to like really shoot out. So mid to late April, early May. And then what you want to look for is that main flower stalk to start its immersion, if you will. And so as soon as the the main stem of those leaves are separating, that's when you would take it. Because usually that main stem of those leaves is very tight. It's a very tight connection, and there's no space in there. So when you see that main part actually opening up and there's a space there, that means that, you know, that process has begun. And so you don't want to take it after that. I mean, you can, but most of the energy that was saved in that heart is then used to create that flower stalk. And so the optimal time would be right before that. And so, like I was saying, like the tip of your thumb or the size of a dime, when that's opened up, that's a good indicator. And then I'll say like the late spring is when they start to flower, and that would be a good time to go out and look. In the video, I'm not sure how well it came through, but in the video at the very end, there was a little comment that I would be remiss to not mention is you got to really check with your state and federal officials to see, you know, what's acceptable, like what's against the law, because these plants are protected. We had special permission to take them for cultural use. And so I would encourage everybody to do their research and due diligence to find out, you know, what you can actually harvest, and also talk to somebody if and get involved with the local tribes, because if you do it wrong, you can actually hurt yourself. And so if you're eating agave that isn't cooked properly, that same blistering on the skin can happen in your throat. You can have some really adverse effects to the use of that agave. So it's something to be respected.
That connects really well to another question that was from the audience. So many agaves are not protected by the Endangered Species Act or other conservation laws, even though they may be dying out as species or locally extirpated. Are there any tribal laws that protect agaves? It sounds like you were referencing some.
So in our community, there's our tribal policies on native plant use. And so there's a lot of policies that say that no plant can be removed without special permission. Certain parts of the plant can be removed for cultural use, but like even the tribal members would be at fault for removing entire plants without going through the process. And so the plants in our community are protected. And so even to cut wood out there, we had to have a special use permit to go gather wood. And even in that, we're not allowed to cut any live plants down. We can gather from them. And so these agave events are like a big thing and takes a lot of coordination. And even though some plants aren't protected on the Endangered Species Act, it's illegal to take certain things off of like national forests or state and federal lands without getting a permit for them.
And Cheryl, how about with your work?
Yeah, within the White Mountain Apache Reservation, it's very similar. There's permitting for wood, and there's requirements for non-tribal members. But for tribal members to continue to harvest is something that is pretty open, which is a concern, because not only is this a issue with what we have with agave, but another one is things like wild tea. There's a lot more people who are harvesting a lot of that and selling it. And so there's a group of people that want to create a plan to protect those and protect the way that they're harvesting them as well. And so that definitely has been something that has been brought up.
Yeah. If I can add one more thing too, is it's not just the fact that we're born into Native American communities and endowed with all this cultural and spiritual knowledge. You know, it's there's a learning curve, and not everybody has all the same information. And so with our permitting process, it kind of ensures that some of those things aren't over harvested or done in a non-sustainable way. And so when we take kids out and we take other groups out to the preserve to actually practice some of these traditional ways of annual harvest, we do it in sustainable ways. And so even when we're harvesting like bayadaj or Ebi, the prickly pear, or the hanam, the cholla buds, we always take like a bract off of the cholla cacti and plant them in the ground when we're going to take some from that plant, just to ensure that there's, you know, a next generation coming up. When we gather our cholla or our willow with our basket makers, we always take some of the branches and throw them in the water so they can reroot downstream. And so there is this understanding in the way that we're trying to approach these things and impart those lessons on our youth and the rest of the community, so that it's not just taken as a resource, but we're reconnecting back into that system, and we're another cog in that whole mechanism that is the ecology of the land, right? And that we're doing our part to not only take but to give and to make a more holistic system.
I think that takes the elements that we've been talking about, this relationship between people and agave, and expands it to the much larger system. So thank you for mentioning them. All right, maybe this is a kind of a nice segue or kind of a continuation of that question. Francisco Terrazas asks, are the plants protected because they are agave, or are they protected because they are on public lands? I'm not sure if there's a distinction there that you can make.
I wouldn't want to overstep my knowledge, I guess, and like speak for another group or entity like the, you know, state or federal lands like the BLM or National Forest. But I do understand through the work we've done is that you do have to possess a permit to remove cultural resources or resources from those lands. There are certain things that in the past were very hard to get approval to even utilize culturally. So agave, saguaro cacti, those are plants that are endangered, and it was hard to get permits to actually continue cultural practices with those plants on some of those lands. Those things have been kind of mediated, I guess, and through consultation, like we've gotten those approvals, but there's still a process that we have to go through to do them. But yeah, I think even to clay and other things, there's a process that exists.
Great. All right, these next two questions are kind of connected. It goes in a bit of a different direction, and I'll kind of ask them together. Is there any tradition of or archaeological evidence for pulque production among the Atum? And kind of connected, were fermented products from agave traditional in what is now Arizona? And that's either of you.
So this, you want me to answer?
Yeah, start.
Oh, it's for the author, right? So I would say, like, if you looked at there was a map of like mezcal use, and I think Professor Fish shared it last time, and I think that goes all the way up into like the southern Arizona area. So I think that would probably be more something that was, I guess, utilized by the Tohono O'odham, if they used it. But I'm not sure here in Salt River or Gila River if that was something that was widely used. And I know this is about tequila and its relationship to the people in agave, you know, and but I think for us, I kind of chose not to talk about too much of that because of the impact that the alcoholism and alcohol abuse has had on the people, you know, and so that's not really our focus. But with that said, you know, there was some plants like elderberry and a couple other ones that were used to create Mawate, or a wine that was drank socially, and so I think things in moderation, you know, were always observed, and so but yeah, I think for the agave, like mezcal or pulque or what have you, I think would be more utilized by the desert O'odham, the Tohono O'odham, because they had a bigger resource there. And I think there was other things to use here further north.
That makes sense. And does that hold, Cheryl, for you and up in the mountains?
Yeah, just hearing from different families again, talking about the fermented drink is definitely an area that people did do and use. But I feel like Jacob does. That's not really my area or my area of interest. Same reasons because of the current situation with alcoholism in our tribe as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you both mentioned that. It's a very important distinction to make. Cheryl, another question for you. This from Martha Burgess. What archaeological evidence is there in White Mountain Apache traditional homelands for agave cultivation, and which species were they growing or harvesting?
Well, that's a good question. But in all honesty, I do not know. I think that's part of what I'm trying to learn as well, is what was available there to, for the historically. And I'm sorry, but I don't know that one either.
Well, I think you have a willing assistant there in Martha to help find that information. It was a question from Wendy. So for anybody that missed it, Wendy opened the lecture series. It kind of connects to this loss. So I wonder if the loss of agaves is due in part to being outcompeted by trees and shrubs. Agaves prefer open areas. So if there were managed low-grade fires in the past, they not only help the skunk bush, but could they also clear areas from the agaves given the preference for open areas? And that's if either of you want to comment on that or both.
I was just thinking, we were thinking about just that as well. What were the impacts and why did we start losing a lot of the plants there? And community members feel that a lot of it is just because of the harvesting. But I do agree with the fire regime as well. We have a lot of what is called nus, manzanita, which really have taken over a lot of our hills there. And there's not as much fire in that area anymore because the communities are in those areas compared to where we actively burn along the ponderosa pine or in the higher elevation. And so, so that's definitely something that we've thought about as well, and looking at areas that are a little lower that have more openness as a place that we could possibly look at to transplant these plants to.
Couple really good questions here to continue to focus on. Let me start with Doug has a great kind of comment and question. So climate change and food security, both very strongly linked. Is there discussion in either community about reclaiming these food plants in a hotter and drier future? Do you want to start, Jacob?
Oh yeah, I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah. And so before we're a cultural resource department, we were actually housed in the environmental protection natural resource department for the tribe, and so I got sent to a lot of like climate change symposiums and conferences and noxious weeds, and so that's one of the things that we do in our garden. Like our garden is not a community garden like most people think. It's not a place where there's an allocated spot for an individual to come and grow and then share knowledge with the rest of the group. It's a place that we use as like a venue to promote Himmadak or to teach our culture. And through that, we've identified all these other plants that aren't necessarily domesticated crops, and not just the plants, but the ability to use them in applicable ways. And like that spiral garden that I showed you was a play on those rock mounds, and we encourage a lot of community members to try to set those up or install those in their home sites, in their landscape, so that they can utilize them for the aesthetic, right? But to plant them with those plants that also have cultural use and they can benefit in either utilitarian purposes of that resource or through the foods. And so through those gardens, you can plant the agave, cholla buds, prickly pear, and all those other things that are sustained by a system that requires very little effort and resources. And so those are something that we are consciously trying to contend with and show community members how to address through the garden. And then on a larger scale, you know, they say, like, let's say tamarisk, for instance. Tamarisk is an invasive species, and if left unkept or to grow on its own, they say in 10 years it can become a monocrop and totally devastate the ecology of a riparian system. And so we look at all these ways to control some of those things. And the seasons are different for us. Like the frosts are coming on later, if not at all. Some of it was looked at as a benefit at first because our seasons were longer. We were getting bigger yields by sustaining our crops longer, but we weren't able to clear the fields and plant for the next season. And so looking at some of these wild annuals and being incorporated into the landscape of our home sites is something that I think is necessary and vital. And like I said before too, a big portion of our diet came from those plants that were drought tolerant, that did exist out there. And there was times when the people suffered famines and blights and their crops failed. And those wild annuals are some of the plants that sustain them, like the mesquite and this agave here that we're talking about, you know. And Wendy's question about like clearing fire, there's talks or stories of how the people cleared fire here or cleared weeds to get the fields ready, and that actually supported new growth for the annuals that we would eat while we were waiting for our plants to grow. And so I would be interested in seeing how that played a role, or if that played a role in some of this sustainability of the wild annuals, because there's places in our community where there's just big monocrop stands of cholla buds or prickly pear, and then like the fields that we identify as agave stands or previous agave stands, like those are cool, and then there's other areas where they won't grow because of the vegetation so dense. And so yeah, I wonder how fire played a role in the wild annuals as well as the ones that we grew in the field.
So many interesting patterns you see on the landscape that I think too often we don't think about humans and people as necessarily working and having that relationship and creating those patterns, and then the removal of activities and also shaping what we see now. Yeah. Cheryl, did you want to add anything under that question? Or in terms of how the food, how food, you're thinking, yeah, how connecting with the food elements and with the agave.
Yeah, I think, you know, just in general, as I was mentioning earlier, the shift in the vegetation is something that our tribe has been looking and seeing because of these fires, a lot of them that have been extreme events where a lot of plants are not growing back because of it. And so, so we're seeing that change in the elevations in the vegetation. And so that was a question that we were asking as well, what kind of plants can we start looking at that are more in the lower elevations as plants that we do harvest and continue to focus on and to protect. Because as I see things, you know, extreme events and hotter temperatures and fires, you know, what ways are people going to learn to adapt to that? But I think the biggest thing for us is just making that awareness, bringing that awareness to our communities so that we're starting to prepare for something like that. And right now we just don't have that information within our communities yet that we need to actively start doing.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in two more questions here. One, this is a brief one for you, Jacob. A question regarding the 700-year-old clone you mentioned of Agave Murphyii. Did you happen to take a snippet and do any genetic analyses or send that to the Wendy and Andrew at Desert Botanical Gardens to them to check to do their genetic magic on it?
Well, I gave one of the pups to the gentleman that was volunteering there, so I'm not sure if it ever made it to the botanical gardens or not. But they're welcome to get more information and get in touch with me, and we can probably do something together. I think it'll be awesome to just know more about that plant and that little stand there, you know. And so the short answer, no. I don't know what was done, if anything, after I gave the gentleman the little baby. It might be at his house growing in, in his backyard.
Oh, well, lots to be done. So let me end on this question. And it really is, it's from Sofia Gonzalez, and it really kind of hits at the core of the series, I believe. And how can people begin a new relationship with agave? Can anything be done for nurturing more agave growth in your areas, and in what ways? So whoever, either of you want to start with that, I think it's a nice way to wrap up this discussion. I'll let, how about Cheryl? I'll let you go first.
I think that's my question as well. You know, how do we get that started, and how do we, and I feel really the important thing is making that connection with our community members, our youth. I really like what Jacob and them are actively doing in their communities, and I really feel that that's something that we need to do. Not only just talking to the people and families, but sharing that knowledge with everyone else, so we can start looking at ways that we can start growing it and protecting it.
Thank you.
And I think for me, so even within our community, like I get a lot of my friends or people I know will say, well, I'm not cultural, so I didn't want to get involved in that because, I don't know the cultural like taboos or standards that need to be adhered to. And those are appropriate, and those are very important. And I don't want to take up too much time because I know I got a minute, but when I was learning about all this stuff, a lot of people didn't want to share with me the knowledge that they had. One, because as a kid I looked a lot different than I do today, but I went out and I started doing it, and I started trying to do it as respectfully as possible with the knowledge that I had. And then once people realized that I was serious and I was trying to get involved, they started sharing with me the appropriate things. Well, you do it this way or you do it that way, and you're on the right track, but that's not necessarily the right way. And so I think doing things with a good heart, and really vetting out all the information that you can get, and trying to find people that do have that knowledge. Because like I said, a lot of people think because it comes from the desert or comes from the environment, it's not as dangerous as like pharmaceuticals or something, but these plants are dangerous too if they're used in the wrong way. And so take care and really look for the knowledge in the people, and there's resources like ours. And so, like I said, we have those links. So Cheryl, all you gotta do is just get in touch with me, and we can work together too on some of that. I think it'll be awesome. And same thing, we have a limited staff, but we're always willing to help. And there's other people just like us that exist out there. And plant one in your yard and learn from it. Let it tell you things.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for sharing with all of us tonight. I know that if we were able to be in person, you would be hearing lots of applause from everyone in attendance. So beautiful work, and thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. And thanks, Doug, for getting me involved.
Speaking of, everyone please join Doug tomorrow evening for leading and continuing the conversation. He's going to be joined by Paco Cantu and Luis Loya of the Amor Mata Mezcal program and collective, and featuring some really beautiful spirits from the arid portions of northern Mexico, and telling, well, digging deeper into the layers here. So that's it for the night. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Be well, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Good night.
Dobre.